Hey Chevah, what's up? Welcome back to Babylon Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Pei, Daf 80 of mezakeh Ayruvin. We're about, 80% of the way through mezakeh Ayruvin. This is already getting exciting. You could already start counting down towards the completion, which is pretty exciting. So today we talk about being mezakeh the ayruv, right? The need to kind of pick up the ayruv and confer ownership upon everybody, right? Is it enough to just proclaim this barrel as belonging to everybody, or does somebody actually have to pick it up and confer the ownership onto everybody? Using an asherah for a lechi and a korah, exciting stuff. Avodah zarah, right? Who wouldn't want to use a avodah zarah for a lechi and a korah if you can, right? So let's see. Maybe you can, maybe you can't. Including people in an eruv chatzeres, do they have to have consent or not? Maybe I'll tell you the interesting scandal with the rabbi who used my credit card because of this svara. Maybe he had a reason for it. We'll see. Maybe we'll get into it. We'll see how we're doing for time. And then we talk about how much food do you need to have for an eruv chatzeres? This is awesome stuff, you know. We learned 80 daf of mezakeh Ayruvin, but now it really gets into the nitty gritty. Already months ago, I think people were asking, there's really a box of matzahs somewhere in this town, you know. And this is, I think, the Gemaras that we're learning today, and maybe tomorrow also, about lemaisa, how do we make an ayruv? You know, we've been talking about everyone takes some bread and contributes it, but in practice, we generally rely on other more automated processes that are less manual, requiring everybody to contribute. So, Chevah, let's go weiter. We're on Daf Pei, 4 lines into the Gemara Meisvei. So, yesterday Rabbi Yehuda said, really, our Mishnah had said that how do you make a shitufei mevos? So one person from one of the mavois takes a barrel, and he says, look, this barrel belongs to everybody in the mavui. And then he gives it to somebody, whether it's his son, his daughter, his wife, his Jewish maidservant, Jewish servant, and they can pick it up. And by picking it up, they say, now everybody has rights to this barrel of whether it's wine, or we're going to see it could be other things. So Rav Yehuda said that you have to lift it up a tefach. Now, Meisvei, we have a kasha against Rav Yehuda. Kate said, Mishtatfin mavoi. How do you make a shitufei mevos? Meviim chovis, shel yain, v'shel shemen, v'shel tamarim, v'shel grogris, v'shel sharmine peris. So you could bring a barrel that's filled with wine or oil, or dates, or figs, or all sorts of other fruits. Im mishelo. So if the contents belong to this person, so tzarich lizakos, well then he will have to be mezakeh to other people. If they belong to him, so then in addition to saying that the contents of this barrel belong to everybody in the mavoi, he will also need somebody else to come and pick it up and then, confer it upon everybody. I think that's the right word. If not, then, I don't know, we'll just have to replace it. Now if it's not his, if it belongs to everybody, so tzarich lodia. So first he has to let everybody know, hey, everyone, here's this barrel that everybody owns part of, and I'm going to make it belong to everybody so that anybody can have. And then he can be the one who can lift it up, mashahu, just a little bit. And then by doing so, he will confer ownership and spread the ownership among everybody. But over here, the key is that last part, mashahu, that he picks it up from the ground, just any small amount. Now, our Mishnah had said he's got to lift it up a tefach. Oh no, Rav Yehuda had said that you have to lift it up a tefach. This Brisa is saying you only a mashu. So, and for the Gemara, my mashu nami dekamer tefach. When we're saying a mashu, it means a tefach. After all, a tefach isn't really that big. Chevah, let's move on. Itmar, we learned by Amoraim, shitufei mevos. When it comes to shitufei mevos, tzarich lizakos, you need to do this lizakos thing, that, in addition to saying that everyone, if this person takes his barrel and says, I'm making this available to everybody in the mavoi, in addition to that, he needs somebody to pick it up and confer ownership upon everybody. Eruv trumin, but when it comes to eruv trumin, which is also very interesting, right? Meaning up until now, every time we've been talking about eruv trumin, it's been you go with a can of tuna fish, you schlep out to the middle of nowhere, you put down your tuna fish and you go home, right? Or you send the messenger to do it for you. But we're going to learn in the Mishnah on Daf Pei Beis at the beginning of the next parak that actually you can kind of automate that as well. You can have somebody kind of here. It's a Mishnah on Daf Pei Beis. It's the first Mishnah in the next parak. It's Kesad Mishtatfim B'Tchumin. How can you join together a lot of people for a tchum? Maniach es achavis v'omer harei ze l'chol b'nei iri. He could just say, he could take some kind of barrel and say, look, this isn't just for me, it's for everybody. So there also, so you have one person doing it for many people. I guess he's probably taking that barrel, and putting it down, 2,000 amas where he wants to be Konesh Visa, and then he could do it for lots of other people. So what do we see? And we're saying what? So, Itmar Shitufim Vos, Rav Omar Ein Tzarech Lizakos. Well, where am I? I think I skipped. Itmar, it was stated, Shitufim Vos. When it comes to Shitufim Vos, right? When it comes to Shitufim Vos, Rav Omar Ein Tzarech Lizakos. I think I totally skipped. Chevra, rewind. Itmar, it was stated, Shitufim Vos. When it comes to Shitufim Vos, Rav Omar Ein Tzarech Lizakos. Rav says that you do not need to be mezakeh. It would be enough for this person to go to take his barrel of wine and say it belongs to I'm giving this as a present to the entire mavui, and then that would be it. He doesn't need somebody to now pick it up. And Shmuel says, like our Mishnah, that in addition to saying that this barrel belongs to everybody, somebody would also have to pick it up and be mezakeh to everybody. Ayruv tchumen. However, when it comes to ayruv tchumen, so if you want to, take a barrel of something, bring it out 2,000 amas, put it down and say that it's for everybody in my city so that they can all, walk 2,000 amas, really 4,000 amas in this direction. So, Rav Amar Tzarech Lizakos, so by Ayruv Tchumen, Rav says that in addition to saying that it belongs to everybody, you would also have to do this Lizakot. Shmuel Amar Ein Tzarech Lizakos, where Shmuel says it would be enough to just say that this barrel belongs to everybody. You wouldn't actually need somebody to pick it up to confer ownership upon everybody. Now, Bishlam the Shmuel. So the Gemara says, I understand Shmuel's position on the matter. Hachatanan v'achalotanan. In our Mishnah, it says, right, meaning because Shmuel's position is that by Shitufei Mevos, you have to be mezakeh. By Ayruv Tchumen, you don't have to be mezakeh, which is completely in line with our Mishnayos. Our Mishnah had said that how do you do Shitufei Mevos? You take a barrel of wine, you say it belongs to everybody, and then somebody else picks it up. Somebody else mezakeh. And if we look at that Mishnah by Ayruv Tchumen, so we say you bring a barrel, but it doesn't, and he says it belongs to everybody, but you don't need to actually, pick it up and confer ownership upon everybody. So Shmuel is completely in line with our Mishnayos. So Bishlama, the Shmuel, I understand Shmuel, Hachatnan v'achalotanan. In our Mishnah over here by Shitufim Vos, it says that you have to be mezakeh, and over there by Ayruv Tchumen, it says, it doesn't say anything about having to be mezakeh. And that's exactly what Shmuel says. Ela Rav, my timer. But according to Rav, what's pshat? How come Rav says that by Shitufim Vos you do not have to be mezakeh, and by Ayruv Tchumen you do have to be mezakeh? That's the exact opposite of our Mishnayos. So Tanoi, so my answer is Lamais, it's Machlokas Tanoim. The Amr Rav Yudah Amar Rav, that Rav Yudah said in the name of Rav, Maise b'chaloso shel Reb Oshaya, that there was a story with the daughter-in-law of Reb Oshaya, Sheholcha leveis hamerchatz, that she went to the bathhouse, and it was outside of the Tchum Shabbos, v'choshchala, and it became Shabbos. And it became Shabbos. So now she was outside of the Eruv Tchumen. Outside of the Tchum. The Erva Lachamosa, and her father-in-law, Reb Oshaya, made an Eruv for her. Uvamaisa lefnei Rabbi Chia. And the story came before Rabbi Chia, v'asar. And he said, that's not allowed. It's not allowed for Reb Oshaya to make this Eruv for his daughter-in-law. V'asar, and he said it's no good. Amar lo Rabbi Shmuel Rabbi Yossi. So Rabbi Shmuel Rabbi Yossi said to Rabbi Chia, Bavloi, Babylonian, which is very interesting. Well, because so apparently Rabbi Chia came from Bavel to Eretz Yisrael, But also what's interesting is that who was the other Bavloi that we saw? Rav Chia bar Abba. Rabbi Yochanan called Rav Chia bar Abba Bavloi in Masechta Shabbos, and Kufay Amud Beis, I think. So interesting that the two Reb Chias were called the Babylonians. Hakopanim. So says Rabbi Shmuel Bar Yosef to Reb Chia, Bavloi, Babylonian, Kokach ata machmir be'eruvin. Why are you being so machmir by Ayruvin to say that Reb Oshai was not allowed to make an ayruv for his daughter-in-law? Kach Amar Abba, because after all, my father Rabbi Yossi said, Kol sheyesh lecha lahakel be'eruvin hakel, that if you could be makil if you could be lenient when it comes to Ayruvin, so be lenient. So therefore, why, Reb Chia, are you being machmir to say that Reb Oshai was not allowed to make an ayruv for his daughter-in-law, an ayruv tchumen to allow her to come back to the city? V'yibailu, and they wanted to know, Mishal chamosa ervala u'mishum delo zichzala. What's the reason why Reb Chia had a problem with Reb Oshai making the ayruv tchumen for his daughter-in-law? Is it because Mishal chamosa ervala that the item that Rabbi Oshaya used to make an ayruv for his daughter-in-law belonged to Rabbi Oshaya, and the issue was that he wasn't mezakeh it to her, i.e., you have to be mezakeh by ayruv tchumen, and he wasn't mezakeh it, and therefore it doesn't work for his daughter-in-law. Or Dilmor, perhaps the issue was mishala ervala umishum d'shalom midaita, or maybe he used her own food, and the issue was that he didn't ask her first. So Amar Loen, Ahumer Rabbanan of Rabbi Yaakov Shmei. So a certain one of the rabbis, and his name was Rabbi Yaakov, he said, L'didi mefarshli minei Rabbi Yochanan, that I heard from Rabbi Yochanan, Mishal chamosa erva, that the issue, that Rabbi Chia's issue was that Oshaya used his own food for the ayruv tchumen for his daughter-in-law, Umishum delo zichsala, and the issue was that he wasn't mezakeh the food to her. So we see that according to Reb Chia, by ayruv tchumen, you would have to be mezakeh, just like Rav is saying over here. Amar Reb Zera, Reb Yaakov, brother Bas Yaakov, Reb Zera said to Reb Yaakov, brother Bas Yaakov, Kimat is awesome when you get to Eretz Yisrael. Which is interesting, because Reb Zera also made Aliyah to Eretz Yisrael, but he was saying to Reb Yaakov, brother Bas Yaakov, that when you get to Eretz Yisrael, Mistam Reb Zera was still in Bavel, Akiv Vizil, go out of your way and go l'sulma de Tzur, to these cliffs of Tzur, Uvayis Mine Reb Yaakov Bar Idi, and ask the following question of Reb Yaakov Bar Idi, meaning, and ask this question of Reb Yaakov Bar Idi, meaning what was the issue that Reb Chia had with Reb Oshaya making the ayruv for his daughter-in-law. Ba'amine mishal chamosa erva umishum delo zichsala. So he asked Reb Yaakov Bar Idi, was the issue that Reb Chia had that Reb Oshaya, that the food that Reb Oshaya used for his daughter-in-law's ayruv tchumen belonged to him, but the issue was that he wasn't mezakeh iter? Or Dilmor, perhaps mishala erva, he used her own food, d'shalom midaita, umshum d'shalom midaita, and the problem was that she was unaware that he was using her food. So Amarle, so Rav Yaakov Bar Idi answered, Mishal chamosa ervala umshum delo zichsala, that the problem was that Rav Oshaya used his own food but was not mezakeh it to his daughter-in-law. So we see that you would have to be, in addition to being mevatel, to say that the food belongs to everybody, in this case to say that the food belongs to his daughter-in-law, somebody would have to be mezakeh to confer the ownership to her, and that didn't happen. So we see that that's a requirement by ayruv tchumen to be mezakeh, like Rav is saying over here. What about the fact that Rav is saying that by shitufim vos you don't have to be mezakeh, and our Mishnah says that you do? Well, Rashi says, Rav Tana hu ufalig. Rav is a Tana, he's allowed to argue on a Mishnah. Wow. Love it. Rav Nachman, said Rav Nachman, Naktinan, we have a tradition. Echad ayruv tchumen, listen up, chevre. Whether it comes to ayruv tchumen, vechad ayruv chatzeris, echad shitufim mevois, tzarich lezakos, you have to be mezakeh. Super cool, because we're like really seeing this, apparently the Rambam paskins like that. And we're really seeing that when it comes to like Ayruvin, there is this concept of just taking some food, saying it belongs to everybody, somebody picks it up, and now that's it. Everyone just did an Ayruv Chatzeres. And mistameh, that's what we do where we live. I assume that's pshat. I never really contributed to an Ayruv Chatzeres, but I guess I don't have to. As long as there's like some fish line around the city, So we're all in one chutzner because of, the Tzuras HaPesach that we learned about. So we're all in one chutzner. Somebody takes some food, I guess, says it belongs to everybody. Somebody else, I guess, picks it up, is mezakeh to everybody. Done. Pretty easy. Alright. I guess it probably has something to do with that. By Rav Nachman, Ayruvin Tavshilin tzarich lezakos or ain't tzarich lezakos. Rav Nachman wants to know, when it comes to Ayruvin Tavshilin, who could tell me what Ayruvin Tavshilin is? When you have 2 days of Yom Tif. So, for example, Rosh Hashanah. If Rosh Hashanah is on a Friday, so then you wouldn't be allowed to cook on Friday for Shabbos. So what you do is you make an Ayruvin Tavshilin. And I don't remember what you take Mazen Shtei Sudas, I guess, and you make an ayruv somehow. And then, do you make a bracha? I don't remember. I don't even know if I've ever done an Ayruvin Tavshilin. I'll go upon him, you make an Ayruvin Tavshilin, and on Friday, and that allows you to cook for Shabbos. So, do you need to be mezakeh? So now the interesting thing about Erev Tavshilin is that if you don't do it, so you can rely on the rabbis. I guess though that Erev Tavshilin, it's easy enough to do on your own, which is very interesting. It's extremely interesting actually. Like out of all the different Erevs, the one that we do, practically is Erev Tavshilin. We don't really do Erev Chatzeres, Shitufim Avos, Erev Tchumen. But Erev Tavshilin people do. Probably because it's easy enough. Because after all, if you don't do it, you can rely on the rabbis, and mistama, relying on the rabbis for Erev Tavshilin shouldn't be really any different than relying on the rabbis for Erev Chatzeros. I don't know, maybe it is, but maybe it isn't. Maybe it's just that the fact of the matter is, it's easy enough for just do Erev Tavshilin on our own. We don't need other people. It's not complicated. You just get some food and make an Erev Tavshilin. Interesting. Let's go weiter. So Erev Tavshilin tzarich lezakos or ain't tzarich lezakos. So by Erev Tavshilin, so I guess if the rabbi is making it for the whole community, does somebody need to pick it up and be mezakeh to everybody? So Amar of Yosef, says of Yosef, what's Rav Nachman asking? Lo shmiele, had Amar Rav Nachman bar Rav Ada Amar Shmuel. Didn't Rav Nachman know that which Rav Nachman bar Rav Ada said in the name of Shmuel? Eruv Tavshilin tzarich lezakos. That by Eruv Tavshilin you have to be mezakeh. Amar Abaye. So Abaye says to Rav Yosef, Pshita de lo shmiele. Well, obviously Rav Nachman did not hear of what Rav Nachman bar Rav Ada Amar Shmuel said. De shmiele, because if Rav Nachman did hear of what he had to say in the name of Shmuel, Maiti ba'ile, then he wouldn't have to ask. After all, Rav Nachman was a student of Shmuel. If he would have heard that Shmuel said that by Erev Tavshilin you have to be mezakeh, so obviously Rav Nachman would have held that you have to be mezakeh by Erev Tavshilin. So it must be that he hadn't heard of what Rav Nachman bar Rav Ada said in the name of Shmuel. To which Rav Yosef responds to by Amarle, to Eruv Tchumen, Milo Amar Shmuel ein tzarich lezakos, v'Amar iu tzarich lezakos. To which Rav Yosef says, but that's not a good argument, Abaye. Just to say that because Shmuel said something, Rav Nachman would listen. After all, Shmuel said that by Eruv Tchumen, you do not need to be mezakeh, and yet Rav Nachman says that by Eruv Tchumen, as well as by Eruv Chatzeros and Shitufim Avos, and all of them you have to be mezakeh. So just because Shmuel says that by Eruv Tavshilin you have to be mezakeh, doesn't mean that Rav Nachman would necessarily hold that way. So Rabbi says, yeah, but that's not a good argument, Rav Yosef. When it comes to Eruv Tchumen, Plige Ravu Shmuel. There's a machlokas Ravu Shmuel, become Ashmalon, and Rav Nachman's telling us, Kichumen Demar, Vichichumen Demar, that he holds like the chumras of everybody. That, right, because in one case Rav says you don't need to be mezakeh, Shmuel says you do, in the other case it's the opposite. So Rav Nachman is just saying, look, we pass on like everybody's chumras. Aval Hacha, but over here by Eruv Tavshilin, he isa de Shmiele, Mika demand the Polig, if Rav Nachman would have heard that Shmuel says, would have in fact heard that Shmuel says that you have to be mezakeh by Erev Tavshilin, there's nobody who argues. So obviously he would have agreed with Shmuel, there's no reason not to. And therefore, if Rav Nachman would have heard of what Rav Nachman bar Rav Ada Amar Shmuel said, that you have to be mezakeh by Erev Tavshilin, certainly he would have held that way. From the fact that he was asking, it must be Rav Yosef that he did not hear that Shmuel said that you have to be mezakeh, and that's why he was asking. Very beautiful. Zok the Gemara. There was a certain non-Jew who lived in the neighborhood of Reb Zera. They said to this non-Jew, can you rent us your property? Lo ogilu, and he wasn't interested in renting them his property. Also they came to Reb Zera. They said to him, can we rent it from his wife if he's unwilling to rent us his property? So Reb Zera said to them, well, this is what Rish Lakish said in the name of a great person. And who was that? It was Reb Chanina. A person's wife would be allowed to make an ayruv for him without his knowledge. So, the answer sounds like yes, that they would be able to rent from his wife. There was a certain non-Jew. And as Rashi says, this Torzina is Nachrishai Memuna al Klei Zayin. He was like, he was in charge of like the weapons that were for guarding the city. Okay. So this fellow, so the B'Shavusa de Rav Yehuda bar Oshaya lived in the neighborhood of Rav Yehuda bar Oshaya. Amrle, they said to him, Ogerlan Rishusach, can you rent us your property? Lo Ogerlu, and he didn't rent it to them. Also the Kamer de Rav Yehuda bar Oshaya. So they came before Rav Yehuda bar Oshaya. Amrle, they said to Rav Yehuda bar Oshaya, can we rent his property from his wife? Lo Avbiyade, and Rav Yehuda bar Oshaya did not know the answer. Also the Kamer de Rav Masna, so they came before Rav Masna. Lo Avbiyade, and he also didn't know the answer. Also the Kamer de Rav Yehuda, so they came in front of Rav Yehuda, Amarlu, and he said to them, Hachi Amar Shmuel, that Shmuel said the following, Ishto shel adam me'areves shelo midaito, that a person's wife would be permitted to make an ayruv on his account without his knowledge. Meisvei Rav Akasha, however, Noshim she'eruv v'nishtatvu shelo midas bailein en ayruv an ayruv, ben shituf an shituf, that women who made an ayruv or joined in a mavoi without the knowledge of their husbands, their ayruv is ineffective. Their shituf and mavos is ineffective. Lo kasha, it's no problem. Hada asar, hada lo asar. It depends if it's a situation where their husband not participating in the mavoi or in the ayruv would create a headache for everybody else. Meaning, if they're depending on the husband to join in the ayruv, and if he doesn't, then nobody's gonna be able to carry. Well, then they would be allowed to contribute and join in the ayruv without his knowledge. However, in a situation, for example, when we have 3 chatzers divided by 2 mavois, and the middle mavoi chatzar generally uses one of the mavois but not the other, in which case, let's say the middle mavoi generally uses the chatzar, the middle chatzar generally uses the mavoi to their right, okay, but not the one to their left. So they would need to make a shituf mavos with the chatzar to their right, but not with the chatzar to their left. So if the chatzar to their left nonetheless wanted to make an ayruv with them, and the wife made an ayruv with them, well, since they don't, they wouldn't be oser on the other chatzar anyway, since they don't usually use that mavui that's between them. So that ayruv wouldn't count since it's not oser. And this also makes sense to make this distinction between when it's oser and when it's not. That when it's oser, then wives can be ma'ariv for their husbands. When it's not oser, then wives would not be ma'ariv for their husbands. The imkain kasha. Because if we don't say this, then we have a kasha de Shmuel ad Shmuel. To Amar Shmuel, because Shmuel said, Echad mipnei mavui sheragil l'shtatif mipnei mavui v'lo nishtatif. So if you have one person if you have one of the people in the mavui that generally, joins together with everybody else, okay, and for whatever reason, 1 week he did not join with everybody else, well, then the people in the mavui can go into his house and chap his shituf from him against his will. So we see ragil in she'ein ragil lo, that if this person generally joins in their ayruv, well, then they're allowed to come in and chap the bread for the shitufim mivos. But if he doesn't normally join together, so then they wouldn't be able to go against his will and do it. So therefore, the same thing applies to the wife, which is that when it's a situation where he'd be osir on everybody else, they're allowed to step in, and they could step in and do the ayruv for their husband. Let's go weiter. Let's say that the following supports Shmuel. Kofin also lasos lechi v'kor lemavui, that you can force somebody to make a lechi or a korah in a mavoi. So even if somebody isn't interested in putting up the lechi or the korah at the entrance to the mavoi, we can do it against his will anyways. But we say that's not necessarily a proof for the whole against your will for the ayruv thing, because shiny asam deleka mechitzis. That the issue over there is that that's more of like a protection thing, right? Because the opening to the mavoi is opened to the public, and I guess putting up some form of a wall, even if it's just a beam across the top, somehow creates more protection. I wonder how, but alright, very nice. So therefore they could put it up against as well. Alright. Fine. Lishna achrina mitzad shiny, and the Agosabach says that you can get rid of that because it doesn't really make sense. Weiter. Itmar, who was taught by Amoraim, Amar Rav Chia bar Ashi Amarav, Osin lechi ashera. You can use an avodah zara tree for a lechi, right? So if you have an entrance to a mavoi and you want to put a lechi, right, at the entrance to it, right, that vertical sort of beam, so then, so you can make a lechi. Reb Shimon ben Lakish Amar, Osin korah asher. Rish Lakish says that you can actually even make a korah, a cross beam, using avodah zara wood. Manda Amar korah kol shekein lechi. Manda Amar lechi aval korah lo. So the Manda Amar who says a korah, kol shekein lechi. So Rish Lakish, who says that you can use a shera wood for a korah, for a crossbeam, well then certainly you can use it for a lechi. How come? Well, let's actually go weiter for a second. Manda Amar lechi, but Rav Chia bar Ashi, who says that you're allowed to use an avodah zara tree for a lechi, aval korah lo, but not for a korah. How come? Because it doesn't have a shiur, right? As Rashi points out, that the pasuk says by an asher v'asherim tisrifun ba'esh. They have to burn asheras, burn avodah zara trees in fire, and therefore they don't have any shiur. We learned in the first parak that a korah has to have a thickness of a tefach, and therefore if a asherah doesn't have any shiur, doesn't have any size, well then it can't be a tefach. However, the lechi just has to be a mashu, it has to be any size. So therefore you would be able to use, if you're Rish Lakish, and Rish Lakish says that you're allowed to use an avodah zara tree for a korah, well then certainly you can use it for a lechi. However, if you're Rav Chia bar Ashi, and you say that in the name of Rav, that you can use a lechi for you can use an asher as a lechi, that's because you don't need a shear, but you wouldn't be able to use it as a korah where you need a shiur of a tefach. Let's go weiter, nismaita ochel, new Mishnah, that if the food for the shitufei mevos got less, and we're about to say how much you need to have, so mosif mezakeh vein tzarich lodia, so you can just add back onto it, right? So we're going to see what the shiur for a ayruv is, but if the shiur diminished, well then you would just replenish it. Ve'ein, right, mezakeh, and you said that it belongs to everybody, ve'ein tzarich lodia, and you don't need to let anybody know, right? And this is assuming that you are adding from your own food. So you can just take your own food, be mezakeh to everybody, say everybody can use it, and then you're mezakeh, no, sorry, one second. Take your own food, you say everybody can use it, and then you have somebody else pick it up and be mezakeh to everybody else. Nitosvu aleim, if people came to the chutz, if people moved into the mavoi on Shabbos, okay, well then mosif, so then you add on, right, umezakeh, and then you add on to the shituf, and right, so if more people move in, so you add on to the food, and then you are mezakeh. You have people pick it up and confer ownership to everybody. V'tzarich lodia, and you have to let everybody know, because that, and the assumption when you have to let everybody know would be if you were adding other people's food to the shituf. Kamu shiuran. What is the shiur for a shituf mevos? And I think the same thing would be for ayruv chatzeres. Bizman shein merubin. If there's lots of people, the Gemara is going to say more than 18 people. Mazon shtei sudis lechulam. So all you need is enough food for 2 sudis for everybody, meaning total of 2 sudis. Bizman shein mu'atin. When they are less than 18 people, the Gemara is going to say 18 people, but when they're not a lot of people, so then you just need a dried figs amount for everybody. So everybody just, as long as there's a dried figs amount for everybody, then that would be enough, but it maxes out at mazon shtei sudis. Once you have enough food for 2 meals, you never have to go larger than that amount. Amr of Yossi says of Yossi, when do we say this? Betchilas Erev, that is only at the beginning of the Erev, Abishari Erev Koshu, but if the ayruv becomes less, then you just need a kol shru. So meaning, whereas the Tanakama said you start out with this amount, but if it diminishes, then you replenish it. So Rabbi Yossi says, however, no, if it diminishes, then it's fine, until it gets to the size of a kol shehu. As long as there's something left, it's acceptable. But at the beginning, there should be, mazon shesudis or a grogris, depending on how many people there are. That the only reason why we say to do Ayruvin chatzeres mistama if you did shitufim mivos would be so that nobody forgets about Ayruvin chatzeres. So that the children don't forget about Ayruvin chatzeres. Says the Gemara, b'maya skinon. When we say, right, this whole first part, right, in the Mishnah, when it says nismai ta'ochel, if the food diminishes, mosif u'mezakeh v'in tzarich lodia, then he doesn't need to let anybody know. So what is this? B'maya skinon, what are we talking about? Ilema b'min echad, if we say that he's replenishing the food that diminished, using the same thing that there was initially, right? So if there was initially some bread, and you replenished it with some bread, well then, my why are we saying that if it became less, then he can just add on and he doesn't have to tell anybody? Afilu kalenami. Even if it completely disappeared, he would just be able to add on more and he wouldn't have to tell anybody. Right? So why are we saying just if it diminished, then he can add on more, he doesn't have to tell anybody? Even if it completely disappeared, he can just replace it and he wouldn't have to tell anybody. So rather it's talking about with two minim, I don't know, so it was bread and then he used wine. So I feel in namilo, but if that's the case, then then even if it didn't completely disappear, it just diminished a little bit, he still would not be able to not tell everybody, i.e. he would have to tell everybody. The Tanya is we learn in the Brisa, if the food completely disappeared and he's replenishing it with the same thing, he doesn't have to let anybody know. But if there are two separate foods, right, like let's say, I don't know, bread and wine, so then he would have to let everybody know. And the assumption is now that is talking about even if it was just nisma'et, he would have to let everybody know. So I could answer to you that it's talking about, right, that our Mishnah could be talking about 1 min, it could be talking about 2 minim. We could say our Mishnah is talking about 1 min. What does it mean that if it becomes less, then he doesn't need to tell anybody? It means even if it's nismat mate, meaning even if it completely disappears, if he's replenishing it with the same type of food, well then he wouldn't have to let anybody know. Or if you want to say mishnei minin, that the Mishnah could be talking about two different types of foods. Nisma'et, my nisma'et. Wait, what? Did I just read the same thing? I must have. If you by saying mishnei minin, or if I'm going to read this again because I don't know what I just said. Yeah, we definitely read that. Right? If it's 1 min, it means even if it completely disappeared, then he would just replenish it and he wouldn't have to say anything. Or you could say it's talking about two different minim, shiny. And what it's saying is that if it completely disappears, right, and then you replenished it with something else, you would have to let people know. But if it just diminished, so then, as the Mishnah says, even if you replenish it with a different food, you wouldn't have to let anybody know. Okay, fine. Nitosfu alei and mosif from mezakeh v'chulei. Okay, so if there more people came, so you can add on, and you would have to be mezakeh, and we're saying that you would have to let everybody know. And Rashi had said that that's dafka talking about if they added food from other people, then you'd have to let everybody know. But if he added his own food, so you wouldn't have to necessarily let everybody know because if it's his own food, right? Meaning, if they're adding food that belongs to everybody, so you have to let everybody know, like, hey, we're gonna make that available to everybody. Is that cool with everybody? But if it all belonged to him, so then he wouldn't have to do that. Okay, fine. So says the Gemara, Amr of Shezvi, says of Shezvi, Amr of Chizda, the name of Rav Chizda, Zosomeres chalukin olav chaverav al Rabbi Yehuda. So this means that Rabbi Yehuda's friends, contemporaries, argue on him, right? Because over here in our Mishnah, we're saying that if people come, so they would add on food to the shituf, and if that food belongs to these people, right, so they would have to announce it, right? Meaning if the food doesn't belong to the person who's being mezakeh, so they would have to let everybody know that we're going to be using the food, the communal food, for the shituf. So this seems to not be like Rabbi Yehuda. The Tananis we learn in our next mission, in two missions, on bottom of Pei Aleph. Amar Rabbi Yehuda, says Rabbi Yehuda, B'medvar mamurim be'eruvei tchumen, aber be'eruvei chatzeres ma'arvin ben ladas ben shelo ladas. That by eruvei chatzeres you can make an ayruv on somebody whether they know about it or not. Whether they know about it or not, which I guess sounds like you can even contribute somebody's food for them to the Ayruvei Chatzeres, even if they aren't aware of it. But over here we're saying no, if we're going to be using other people's food for food for an Ayruvei Chatzeres, we have to first let them know that we're going to be using their food for the Ayruvei Chatzeres. Whereas Rabbi Yehuda said we wouldn't have to let them know. So Pshita, this is obvious, the Chalukin, that they disagree. I mean, they're saying the opposite things, right? That Tanakama says that you would have to let people know. Rabbi Yehuda says that you don't have to let people know. So I may have thought maybe they all agree. Maybe even in our Mishnah they agree that you wouldn't have to let people know by an Eruv Chatzeres. But I would have thought Hanimili b'chatzer shebein shnei mevaos. I would have thought to say that our Mishnah is talking about a chatzer that is between two mavois, and we don't know which shituf he wants to join in, right? Because there's mavoi on either side. We don't know which shituf, so maybe that is why our Mishnah is saying that if we want to include somebody in an Eruv with their food, we have to let them know, right? But maybe I would think aval chatzer shamavoi echad emalo. But if it's just one mavoi, so then we would allow somebody we would just make an Eruv for them and include them in the Eruv. So Kamash Malan, so what Rav Shezvi is teaching us is that even just in a regular Chatzer, right, or a regular Shitufei Mivos, you would be able to include somebody in the Shitufei Mivos even without their knowledge. And as Rabbi Yehuda, wait, what? So Rabbi Yehuda says that you'd be allowed to include somebody even without their knowledge, but what Rav Shezvi is saying is that everybody else argues on Rabbi Yehuda and says that you would not be able to make an Eruv on somebody without their knowledge. And the reason why Rabbi Yehuda says that you're allowed to make an Eruv for somebody without their knowledge is because of the concept of Zachin la'adam shelo b'fanav, that you're allowed to do somebody a favor even if they're not around. And I mentioned the story of that rabbi who used my credit card. Yeah, so one time there was this rabbi who asked if he can use my credit card to pay, I think, the water bill for the shul. I think they hadn't paid their water bill in like over a year or something. And so I said fine, it was no problem. So he used my credit card to pay the water bill. And then he added on a few things as well. And he said it was okay because Zachin la'adam shelo b'fanav, because you can do somebody a favor without their consent. So, I wasn't so impressed by that. I thought it was a little bit taking advantage, like I offered to pay his water bill after a year of them not paying for it. And then he kind of like added a few items on his own. But maybe you can argue that he was Lamaisa just doing like Rabbi Yehuda, right? Rabbi Yehuda is saying that you can use somebody's food for an Eruv to, contribute it to the Eruv, to include him, because Zachin la'adam shelo b'fanav. But Lamaisa, apparently it would sound like everybody disagrees with that, though. I don't know. Okay, let's go weiter. So our Mishnah had said, right, Kamu Shiura, and how much is the shear of the Eruv? Bizman Shei Merubin, if there's a lot of people, Mazon Shtei Sudis, so then you need food for 2 meals. Right, Bizman Shei Mu'atin Ki Grogers L'chol Echad. But if there aren't so many people, then just enough for a dried fig for everybody. So the Gemara says, Kamu Merubin, what's considered a lot? So Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel Shmona Eser B'nei Adam. So Rav Yehuda says the name of Shmuel. We're talking about 18 people. Shmona Eser V'sulo. What? There's a max of like 18 people in the shituf. So Ema Mishmona Eser Ve'elach. No, from 18 and on is considered a lot. Umay Shmona Eser Dinaka. What's so special about 18? Rav Yitzchak Breda Rav Yehuda, says Rav Yitzchak, the son of Rav Yehuda, L'didi Mefarshli Minei Da'aba. It was explained to me in the name of my father. Kol she'ilu mechalko lemazin shtei sudes b'neien Vein magas groigris l'chol echad ve'echad heinen merubin. V'sagi b'mazon shtei sudes. What's the significance of 18? 18 is the amount that if you take 2 mazon shtei sudes and you divide it up in 18 parts, then you won't get a grogris anymore, right? Meaning, so as we said, if there aren't so many people, then each person contributes a grogris, right? A dried fig. And as long as there aren't so many people, they contribute dried figs. But once already the dried figs would be more than enough food for 2 meals, well then already it gets capped at enough food for 2 meals. And it says the Gemara, V'sagi mazon shtei sudas ve'ilo, and if not, heinen mu'atin nenu, so then they would be considered a little. The Agab Orche Kamashman, and it teaches us the Shtei Sudas having Shmonesrei Grogris, that 2 Sudas is 18 Grogris, right? So basically what we're saying is that the minimum shear for, right, the shear for the Shitufim Vos is a dried fig. Now you contribute enough, everyone contributes a dried fig until you get to, I mean it doesn't have to be, but meaning theoretically enough of a dried fig until you get to Mazon Shtei Sudas and it gets capped over there. And we learn that how much is Mazon Shtei Sudas? Essentially it's 18 dried figs, right? So 18 people, once they contribute a grogris apiece, then it would already be more than Mazon Shtei Sudas and it can get capped over there. So we also see that Mazon Shtei Sudas is 18 grogris. Very beautiful. Chavra, let us do a shtickle review of Daf Pei of Masechta Ayruvin. So we talked at the beginning about being mezakeh the ayruv, right? In addition to saying that the ayruv belongs to everybody, do you also have to pick it up and be mezakeh to everybody? So Rav says, well, in a mavoi you would not have to, and for ayruv tchumen you would have to. Shmuel says the opposite, that by shitufim mevos you would have to be mezakeh, by ayruv tchumen you would not, just like our Mishnah. Rav Nachman says that by all of them you would have to be mezakeh, by a mavoi, by tchum, by a chotzer, and then he asked about ayruv tavshilin, to which we said that Shmuel says that you would have to be mezakeh there as well. We talked about using an asherah for a lechi and a korah. Reb Chia bar Ashi says that you can use it for a lechi. Reish Lakish says you can even use it for a korah, and the chiddush by a korah is that it actually needs a shear of a tefach, and you can even use an asherah that needs to be burnt. You can nonetheless use it for a korah, including people in an ayruv chatzeris. So Rabbi Yehuda says that you would need their consent to do so. You wouldn't just be allowed to use somebody's food and to include him in an ayruv chatzeris without his consent. The Chachamim say, right? So Rabbi Yehuda says you could do it even without his consent. Chachamim say Yudavka would need his consent. And at the end we talk about what is the amount that you need to contribute to a ayruv. We say what you need to contribute to an ayruv is, or shitufim mevos, I think it's going to be the same amount, is grogeres for each person until you get to the 18 dried figs, which is enough for 2 meals, and it gets capped at Mazon Shtei Sudas, enough for 2 meals. Everybody, peace out.